Hi guys, welcome to Multiverse. Today we're going to talk about Jack Kirby, also known as Jack the King Kirby or the King of Comics. The reason why we're talking about him today is that today would be his 100th anniversary. Some of you may not know this, but Jack Kirby uh, co-created, I should say, a lot of characters that are huge right now. Like a lot of characters that you see in the Marvel movies come from Jack Kirby. Captain America, he co-created Captain America with Joe Simon during World War II. He co-created the Fantastic Four with Stanley. Also, the Avengers, the X-Men. Even though the X-Men that he created are not really the X-Men that became hugely popular, those were reinvented a bit later by David Cockrum and Len Wein, if I'm not mistaken. But still, he created the basis of the X-Men for Len Wein and Dave Cockrum to later on transform them into what was known as the all-new X-Men at the time. So without the X-Men, the all-new X-Men probably wouldn't have existed. So even though his version of the X-Men is not really the version that became hugely popular, he did lay the foundation for the X-Men with Stanley, not just the same. And of course, he created Iron Man. He co-created Iron Man. He co-created the Hulk. He co-created Machine Man. There's so many characters that it's hard to name them all. He laid the groundwork of what would become the Marvel Universe. And although he technically co-created a lot of those characters alongside Stanley, actually, there's also quite a few characters that he seems to have come up on his own. There's this tale that has been told in various interviews, either by Stanley or other people, where when he met Jack Kirby to discuss the issue of Fantastic Four, which would become the first appearance of Galactus. Basically, they had a meeting where Lee told Kirby, "Okay, let's have the Fantastic Four fight God in this issue." That's pretty much was the bare bone of the plot that was given to Kirby. So Kirby went and ran with it and added the Silver Surfer to the story. It didn't make sense for him for a big guy like Galactus not to have some sort of emissary that would scout ahead for him, and that would be his herald that would make first contact for him. And so he came up with the Silver Surfer. And at first, Stan had no idea what this character was. But you have to give credit to Stan. And a lot of other editors probably would have said, "A guy on a surfboard, that's ridiculous," and would have gotten rid of it. But Stan grabbed the ball and ran with it, and essentially fleshed out the personality that we know that the Silver Surfer has today. Sadly, in the late 60s, early 70s, Jack became a little disenchanted with his position at Marvel, and he decided to make the jump from Marvel to DC. And that's how we got the New Gods. Uh, when Jack went to DC, he started doing four series for them. He started doing a series called Mr. Miracle. There was a series called The Forever People. He started also working on Jimmy Olsen at the time. And last but not least, he started working on the New Gods. And all those four series were pretty much interwoven together into a huge epic. And that's how we got to be introduced to characters like Orion, like Mr. Miracle, like Dark Side. It wasn't the first time that Jack Kirby worked for DC. He had worked previously for DC on series like Green Arrow, or even I think he had created with Joe Simon the character Manhunter, the Paul Kirk version of the character. You're probably familiar with later incarnations of the Manhunter character, but originally Manhunter was a character known as Paul Kirk, and he was literally what the name says, a manhunter. He was a hunting man. Not sure if it was for sport or money or both. It's been a while since I looked at them comics. So from creating the New Gods, that's why in this universe online we have DLCs like the Halls of Power, which are filled to the brim with characters created by Jack Kirby. So again, the characters that you see in Hall of Powers, like Mantis, Calibac, those characters come directly from the New Gods. They came directly from the mind and the pencil of Jack Kirby. There's also, but then later on, after the New Gods, he created a handful of their series for DC Comics. He created a series called Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth. It was essentially a reverse, a sort of a Planet of the Apes type of series. From what I understand, it's essentially what it was. DC told Jack, "Hey, can you come up with something like Planet of the Apes for us?" And he came up with Kamandi, the last boy on Earth. Although it wasn't just the apes that had taken over, but all different animal species. There were the tigers, there were the baboons, and there were also a bunch of grotesque creatures that I guess we could call them mutants. And later on, he also created a series called The Demon. Again, if you remember your early DC Universe Online missions, you do meet Etrigan the Demon a few times. We even got an Etrigan the Demon emblem not too long ago, and that came straight from Jack Kirby. His Etrigan series, the Demon series was awesome. If you ever get the chance of getting your hands on the omnibus version of that series, it's a masterpiece. I strongly suggest it to anyone. And also, he created a handful of other series that I failed to recall before finally leaving DC and going back to Marvel for a while. At Marvel, he worked again on Captain America, and he also created a handful of new series for them as well. He created the Eternals, from where the Celestials come from. If you saw the first Guardian of the Galaxy, you actually see a couple of Celestials. The big humanoid head in which a part of the movie happens is actually the head of a Celestial. And also even on when the Collector talks about the Infinity Stones, you actually see in one of the screens a huge Celestial. I forget which Celestial it is, but so the big huge guy with the big staff who strike the ground of the planet, and then you see the whole thing explode. That was a Celestial, and that came straight from Jack Kirby. And I was really surprised and happy and impressed that they actually used a Celestial as in that film, even if it was just as a background character. It it still was surprising that they actually went there, because way too often people will say that things that were done in the 70s are a little too silly, and they're trying to avoid using those in movies or in TV shows. And luckily, we had James Gunn, the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, who instead of cringing at that old 70s stuff, he actually embraced it and decided to use it. Heck, he used Rocket Raccoon. Rocket Raccoon wasn't created by Kirby, but he used Rocket Raccoon, something that a lot of people would have said was too silly, and he made it work. It actually worked. He gave credit to people to be able to accept this little guy who would actually be a raccoon that talks. We even have a talking tree. The talking tree, I'm not sure if it was created by Kirby, but Kirby actually did the very first story with Groot. It was just a short science fiction story, just a few pages, like I don't know, 6 or 10 pages. And it's this evil alien who comes to Earth. He says, "I am Groot," and he finally gets defeated by Termite at the end of the comic. But somehow they reused the character later down the line, and it became the Groot character that you see in the Guardians of the Galaxy. So a lot of his ideas were very powerful ideas, and they're still mining his imagination and his ideas even today. So when he was at Marvel, he created the Eternals. He also created a little series called Devil Dinosaur. It was basically this adventure of this creature known as Devil Dinosaur, some sort of T-Rex looking creature, but with weird proportions. And there was also Moon Boy, who was basically Devil Dinosaur's friend. I think it's also at that time that he created Machine Man. Basically, he did the comic adaptation of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then later on they did an ongoing series, or what should have been an ongoing series, but it only lasted, I think, a handful or two of issues or two. And within those pages, we were introduced to Machine Man. So when he came back to Marvel, he created a handful of series, once more with brand new characters that we had never seen before. And later on, and then went back to DC again. This time when he went back to DC, uh, the only series I really remember him doing at the time at DC, it was a series called Superpowers. It was, I guess, it was the answer at DC to Marvel's Secret Wars. Uh, it's been a long time since I read those comics, and I didn't read them originally as they were published. I read them only years later. So if a lot of you guys don't know a lot of the stuff that I just talked about, and if you aren't that familiar with Kirby, that's all right. There was a point in time when I wasn't familiar with Kirby either. I could see his work, I could recognize his work, but at the time I didn't really understand the importance that an inker had over a penciler's work. So I didn't understand why sometimes some of his artwork was more appealing to me, and sometimes not so much. Kirby had a really rough way to draw his characters. His characters were often gruff looking, with crooked teeth or teeth missing, or they were grotesque looking a bit. And I didn't quite understand that. And often his artwork would be quite different depending on who would be inking it. There were artists like John Romita Sr. or Joe Sinnott who they would ink anyone and they would make the work beautiful. And there were other artists who like Vince Coletta, for example, who whenever he would ink someone, it would become a Vince Coletta drawing, and he would take whatever artwork and bring it to his level. So if he took the artwork of a lesser artist, well, he would raise the level, the art of that artist to his level. But when he took the artwork of a better artist like Kirby, he actually would lower the he would actually lower Kirby to his level. It was still, you could still recognize Kirby, but it wasn't as powerful as what Kirby usually does, and it's something I only understood much later. So when I was a kid and I was seeing a Kirby artwork, it was hit or miss. For each Kirby artwork that I really enjoyed, there was a Kirby artwork that I didn't care so much about. And years later, when I was working on the series Bob Moran, there's one of my coworker who actually introduced me to the Jack Kirby collector. And within those pages, you would see penciled reproduction of pencils from Kirby's work. And then you could see the actual penciled work before someone like Joe Sinnott or someone like Vince Coletta would actually ink it. So you can see how much Joe Sinnott would be embellishing his work, but you will see also how much someone like Vince Coletta would actually lessens his work, which actually loses a lot of the powers that you had in his work. Kirby had a very powerful style and a very graphic style and a very powerful style, but someone like Vince Coletta would drain a lot of the power out of Kirby's work. But even a lesser Kirby piece of work would still be a powerful piece of work, no matter who was inking it. And also, as I was working in animation and as I was learning more and more about what Kirby had done, I came also to realize that I was seeing a lot of Kirby's work without knowing it, without realizing it. He had influenced pretty much everyone who came after him. Sal Buscema, I love the artwork of Sal Buscema, and I didn't know. I hope I know I'm mispronouncing the name, but I didn't know at the time that Sal was basically following Kirby's blueprint on how to do comics. He just was doing it in a more realistic fashion. He still was pretty graphic. Like essentially, you had Sal Buscema and you had his brother John Buscema. John Buscema to me was a more realistic artist as opposed to Sal, who was a more graphic artist. But basically, both came from the Kirby school of doing comics. It's just that John Buscema had taken the style in a more realistic way, was trying to draw it a bit more realistic, and Sal was doing doing the artwork a bit more graphic. But both had a lot of Kirby in their work, and the same it can be said for pretty much anyone who followed Kirby. Barry Windsor Smith started pretty much as a Kirby clone and grew into Barry Windsor Smith later on. John Byrne has a lot of Kirby in his work. Mike Mignola has a thick influence by Kirby, and which is probably why a series like Cosmic Odyssey with a whole bunch of characters was so good when penciled by Mignola. And even the DC Universe animated series were greatly influenced by Kirby. When you look at the Batman animated adventure style, a lot of the artwork is inspired directly by Kirby. Basically, the Batman animated series is you take one part Kirby, one part Mike Mignola, and a lot of manga influence. You mix it all together, and you have Batman the animated series. And it was even more true when they did the Justice League series. There's some episodes where they would lift stuff directly from Kirby's work. I remember this one episode where you have a nuclear bomb or something, and they actually recreated the gamma bomb scene from the Incredible Hulk #1. They recreated the Captain America origin, but with a twist that it was some evil Germans who were trying to create the ultimate super soldier. And even some of their characters, like Grundy, Solomon Grundy, they're pretty much treated like the DC Universe version of the Hulk. Like they even went as far as to create the Defenders in the Justice League Unlimited series by having Dr. Fate stand in for Doctor Strange. They had Hawkgirl being essentially Nighthawk. Solomon Grundy was the Hulk. And what's his name? Amazo was the Silver Surfer. Or in this case, more like the Golden Surfer. So in many ways, you are seeing Jack Kirby's work, whether you know it or not, either as an influence, or as an Easter egg, or as sometimes even as a ripoff. So next Halloween, when you do the Halloween seasonal, and you see Clarion the Witch Boy, remember that came from Kirby. Or next time that you fight Mr. Miracle, or Big Barda, or Mantis, or that they gave you, or that those guys gave you a mission, that came from Kirby. The next time you fight Calibac, that came from Kirby. Heck, even Bruno Mannheim. The next time Bruno Mannheim kicks your behind, that came from Kirby. The next time Etrigan the Demon gives you a mission, that came from Kirby. There's a lot of stuff that comes from Jack Kirby that is still being used today, and that a lot of people aren't really aware of, which is understandable. Often things aren't credited properly, or people sometimes just don't know who created the stuff they're looking at. Or sometimes things get lifted from other sources and people just don't know it. It's okay, it happens. But now you know. And so I thought it was important to take at least a few minutes to commemorate the memory of this man who created a lot of the things that we the fans love, a lot of the things that we see now in movies, and a lot of the things that we see in video games and still in comics today. So sorry for this long video. I didn't expect it to last this long, but it happens. So that's pretty much it for now, guys. So as always, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.